not managed to fly a Hurricane myself, but when I spoke to Trevor this morning, he talked about that high-speed entry for that loop. He said we need to get it going as fast as we can to enable us to have the performance for a loop. And he said, in this aircraft, when you get it going as fast as you think you've got it, it starts shaking, that sort of wooden fabric fuselage starts shaking, and you think you're going really fast, and then you look in, actually you're still only at around about 200 miles an hour, so you've got to go faster still. So he says very, very different to flying a Spitfire.
And of course the Hawker Hurricane really is a development of the biplanes they were producing in the early 1930s. You know, the Hawker Hart, Fury, Nimrod and so on. If you look at them in profile, you can see that the fuselage shape is pretty much the same, the tailplane is pretty much the same, and actually the cowling is much the same as well. It's just it's got closed cockpit and it's a monoplane. And it's got a bigger engine. But what that does mean, of course, is that when you're trying to suddenly increase production dramatically, a lot of the machine tools and the know-how are already in place. And it's actually creating the machine tools is half the thing. That's one of the things that's most expensive in new aircraft production. The Spitfire, by contrast, is completely new. Everything about it is new. It's completely unique to the Spitfire. Whereas lots of taken over bits, copied from earlier models. That does mean that while sort of rooted in an earlier generation of aircraft, it is also easier to quickly produce in numbers. And they more than performed a job in 1940, and frankly the country owes a debt to the Hurricane out of all proportion to its brilliance as a fighter aircraft. And all those that flew it, of course.
Well, one of the stark differences between the Hurricane and the Spitfire is the thickness of the wing. If you look at the front of a Hurricane, the thickness of the profile of the wing it's much thicker on a Hurricane and clearly much thinner on a Spitfire. And one of the challenges they had with the Spitfire was trying to fit all of the armament and of course the undercarriage, the retractable undercarriage, into the wing. So that was one of the challenges they faced, but some brilliant design, and they obviously achieved it.
Well, yeah, thank goodness. And that famous elliptical wing would never have been designed if the requirement had been to have cannons which are much bigger and chunkier than machine guns. Both the Hurricane and the Spitfire are equipped with 8 Browning .303 machine guns. They could store enough ammunition to fire for 14.7 seconds continually, which I'm sure you'll agree is not very much. Whereas the Messerschmitt 109 had 55 seconds worth of machine gun ammunition, which obviously gave it a little bit of an advantage. So ME 109E, I should say then, MEL.
I did that earlier, I got quite looking at the Spitfire because I have a really big camera.
What that also means is the 8 Brownings on the Hurricane could be much closer together because of the thickness of that wing, whereas in the Spitfire they have to be spread out. Hurricanes are in their early war livery of the green and the brown, which switched over to grey and green in 1941. So it's only over European skies at any rate. So that's the kind of 1939, 1940 look. A bit like new football kit each season. By 1941 they'd moved on. And actually in 1940 they got rid of the split black and white underside as well.
What was the purpose of that, James?
Just recognition from the ground.
Have you got the stat in your head, the number of successful kills by Hurricanes during the battle compared to Spitfires?
It's about 55% to 45, but that does need qualification.
And the main qualification is that
The Spitfires, for the most part, were given the job of shooting down the fighter planes. Fighter planes are faster, more nimble, harder, smaller, and more difficult to shoot down than bombers, which are slower and offer, obviously, because of their size, offer a larger target. So that's kind of really why. I don't think you could argue that the Hurricane was better than the Spitfire Mark I in 1940. It just wasn't. But it was still a very, very good fighter plane, certainly for 1940. And more than a match for the Luftwaffe's bombers, more than a match for the Me-110, the twin-engine Luftwaffe fighter plane in a fighter role. Obviously the 110 was used as a night fighter and as a bomber and a ground attack aircraft and many other roles, but as a fighter on fighter, you'd want to be in a Hurricane rather than a 110. And as I say, it can take a lot of punishment, not least because the fuselage is all made, although it's got metal frame, it's covered in doped Irish linen. And if you get a bullet through it, you just whap another patch on. It's super easy to repair. Numbers count, and what the RAF were able to do and the Ministry of Aircraft Production was able to change was the civilian repair organisation, overhaul that. Production was overhauled. A lot of things were put in place, like shadow factories, which were where you sort of disperse from the main factory and you have different factories producing component parts. That was all in place by May 1940, but it was Lord Beaverbrook, the press baron, Canadian press baron, personal friend of Churchill's, who took over as the first ever Minister of Aircraft Production in middle of May 1940, who really accelerated that change. Increased production of repaired aircraft back into flight rose by 168% between May and July 1940. Repaired engines by 145%. And production out itself was dramatically outproducing that of the Luftwaffe by 1940. The reason why there were more